spoken to us in His Son. You understand the movement there? Saying, yeah, God spoke to them in many portions in many ways, but in these days, He spoke to us through His Son. And so, yeah, there's a development there. Things are different now. And I could say, yeah, you see the difference? We'll talk more on it in class. You see what his question is? It's a dense question, which we'll try to answer that. We'll talk one-on-one if we need to try to split it on that. If you don't define the terms real well, it's going to be very difficult to understand what's being asked. But okay, with that being said, yeah, what I'm arguing is that's where you've got Christ. I'm arguing this is talking about Him right here. From the Torah itself, I'm going to argue that that's what the author's trying to do. And in the New Testament, it seems to be that's the way that Paul and these guys are taking it. They're looking at the text and they're saying, it's firstborn, all things are created by Him, for Him, in Him. So what I'm arguing is the text is not as concerned with the time. And what I mean is, us as Americans, all we're going to think about is, give me the historical period that it was created in. I'm going to argue that's our focus, but I don't think that's the text's agenda. I think this text is written with the agenda being bringing us toward Christ. Bringing us. You have everything being made by Him, for Him. You have the fall happening, and you have this movement where it's all bringing us to Christ. And I think the text has a different agenda than we do. We go back to the text and try to compress it on science, whereas I don't think the author cared. And what I mean is, okay, the text says, and the sun was coming up. Scientifically, is that correct? Does the sun go up? No, it doesn't. The sun stays in one spot. The world revolves. So is the Bible wrong? No. That's the author of the text is not thinking. He could care less about what you think about science. That's just a normal daily term used by humans saying, look, the sun's coming up. Now, if I take science and press that grid over the text, then yeah, I'm abusing the text. That's not the point of the text. Okay? In Job and other spots where it talks about it says, and the Lord has stretched stretched across the sky, the sky like an iron sheet. Okay, he's referring to the sky looking like an iron piece of sheet metal. Is the sky a piece of sheet metal? Well, no, of course not. That's not the author's point. The author's using this language, which is normal, to create ideas. We're the ones pressing our grid on the text. So let's let the text speak and let the text determine meaning, not try to press what we think it ought to be saying. But I'm arguing the text is pointing us toward Christ, toward the firstborn of God, who is all over the Old Testament, I would argue. But all right, with that being said, we're going to move a little bit further. When Paul, notice one other thing I'm going to point out. See how much time we have. If you guys will remember Colossians, okay, turn back to Colossians with me. You see where Paul, he says in Colossians 1:15, it says He's the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. All things are created by Him, for Him, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones, dominions, rulers, all things have been created for Him. He is before all things hold Him together. Okay, do you guys remember, I mentioned earlier word pairs. In Hebrew, you guys remember how Rishon was paired with Acharon throughout the Old Testament? The beginning of the reign to the end of the reign. You see how that pairing happens. If you'll look back at Numbers 24:20 again with me. Just got a couple minutes. We're going to put this. Look at Numbers 24:20. And he looked at Amalek, and he took up his discourse and said, Amalek was the reshith of the nations, but his acharit will be destruction. You see how these words are paired together? The author keeps linking these words, putting them together. What I'm also going to argue is that from the structure of the Torah, I think one of the other reasons that the author is using reshith here at the beginning. So you've got reshith right here, right? This camera's just dying on me. I'm going to do something else. So you've got reshith right here. Well, what was the word used in all poetic themes?
Operate?
Yeah. What I'm also going to argue that the structure of the Torah itself, right here you have reshith at the beginning, and then you have acharit being used in each of the seams. I'm arguing that the author's also, through structure, he's connecting the firstborn as being right, the by means all things are made through him, but I'm also arguing that the author's connecting him to the seams because of the word pair here. The fact that acharit is the word that's being used in each of the seams intentionally, I think that the author is trying to communicate that not only is Christ the beginning, he's the end. All things are made through him. All things will come to consummation through him. I think the author's linking him to each of these seams through the word pair here. So in the New Testament, when they're talking about he's the beginning, he's the end, Alpha, Omega, whatever you want to call it, I think the author is seeing these linkages, and he's saying, hey, not only did everything come in through him, it's all going to conclude and finish in him. You guys see what I'm talking about? That makes sense. And anyway, that's what I think. How the author he's linking these together. So yeah, the Achari, the end days, the seams talk about him coming. The creation is about him. The creation comes in through him, and then the end comes in through him. That makes some sense to you guys? You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. All right. But I think the author, as you can see, I think he's using Hebrew and the techniques found within Hebrew to communicate. You understand? These aren't as familiar with us, right? Because we're English, we're Americans, we don't do Hebrew. But to them, I think it was very familiar, and I think the author has used the techniques that are used within Hebrew to create meaning. He's using those to create meaning, and I'm going to argue an observant reader is going to catch this. You're going to see all this, and so I know it's a handful, but I want you guys to just think through that with me. Because I do, this is why I think the author didn't use either of these words, because either one of these would have easily meant beginning. But I think he used this one, which does not easily mean beginning, on purpose, and he used it intentionally to communicate about the Trinity, about the Son of God, and to connect him as the beginning, the end. Another thought. That's what I'm saying. Why, if the author is trying to say firstborn, why not just say boker in Hebrew? The word boker. Could have used that one. That means firstborn. Why not use that one? Well, if you use that one, you wouldn't have a connection between him and the seams. Boger doesn't have a word pair that's going to fit here, right? I'm arguing he used this one because it's the perfect word to connect him to each of the seams and to communicate so much meaning. And so this, within the Torah, I think the author has just loaded this text with meaning. And if you pay attention to it and work with it, I think that's how we're going to mine it out and we're going to see what's happening. But anyway, that's I think as far as we're going to go today. My last thought. You guys see how? Again, what is my thesis? What am I arguing here? You go left to right, right? You start with the Torah and you move this way. And I'm going to reverberate this. That's what when Paul and these guys are saying this stuff. I'm going to argue they're not just creating stuff out of thin air. They're reading the text correctly. And if anything, I'm going to argue we're not reading the text correctly. We need to try to go to the text, figure out what is the text agenda, and let the text create the meaning. Not what is our culture pressing on us as is most important, but what does the text think is most important. That's what we need to aim at. But anyways, any other questions before we cut it?
Can you re-emphasize how Bereshith is tied to Bara, and why John sees that connection?
Yeah, I would say the alliteration. Just you see the Beit, Resh, Aleph, Aleph. I think the author's intentionally linked these two together.
The firstborn is connected to the Creator.
To the Creator.
Who is Elohim.
So he's not only are things made through him, but he is also God. He's being connected to Elohim.
Yep.
And so the firstborn is divine. He is the Son of God. He is the firstborn of God, the prominent one of God. All things are made through him. That's what I'm arguing. And the Spirit's hovering around the water, so you have the Trinity right here at the beginning. I think that's how he's creating meaning. I think that's what John sees, Paul sees, the author of Hebrews sees. I think that's the early church saw it. Even you mentioned the Jonathan Targum. There's a guy from, when was that? BC something?
It would have been, that Targum was written in about 600 AD, give or take. But the most extant copy, the earliest extant copy, goes back to the Middle Ages. But I'd have to look at it, but it kind of thinks of it the same way that John does.
There was another guy who was looking at
That
this.
Bereshit is tied to God himself because of this letter by letter
Yeah.
parallel.
The thought is that this idea is not new. This isn't something that's just been created. This is something that's existed for a long time that we're not seeing, and we're going to argue is what we need to see.
So hanging off of what David's talking about, because when I'm sitting here looking at this, okay, you got bara, the verb, God created, and you come over here to Bereshit. And earlier you said because of the bait attached to, what is it,
Yeah.
Ra'ash,
Sheet, yep.
or no, Ra'ash? Reshith.
Reshith.
So now you went from bara, but you're saying there's a wordplay going on here, when actually though, bara and reshith are not the same words. That the bait is a preposition.
Right, exactly.
But the bet resh aleph is what the author is
Yeah.
trying to
I'm
tie
going to say it's
the two words
intentionally and
together.
precisely.
So that
Because he didn't have to use that word, but he did intentionally to tie those two words together so that the
so
firstborn
could a
was-
super literal translation be God created by the Creator?
If I if I was going to make this fit in English, I would say by means of the Creator God created. Absolutely, that would be the idea. You understand, because in the English you would have that would catch the wordplay. You would have Creator created. That's in English.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, exactly. You'd have by means of the Creator God created. That would be the wordplay. If we were to try to make it go across in English, but I'm trying to let it stay in Hebrew rather than just bring it across. But actually, in the paper I wrote about this, I put that in there. 'Cause, I think that's the idea. But that's great. Anything, y'all guys? Any other questions before we pray and dismiss? Alrighty, let's go ahead and we'll put it together. We'll pray, then we'll get out of here.